David lived alone in a small farmhouse on the edge of Sector 9. He had left the war behind, the noise, the orders, the blood. Now he just wanted peace. No friends, no neighbors, no problems, just him, his dog Max, and silence. One morning, he received a strange message on his com screen. It was an ad, glowing bright red. Smart pet clearance, limited stock. 1 credit only. He laughed at it at first, but something about the ad stayed with him. A quiet home could use some company, he thought. Something simple, like a small robot pet. He clicked the link. No reviews, no return policy. Just a single model code. PX19, Advanced Emotional Companion. He pressed order, expecting a toy, maybe a robotic cat or dog. The next day, a black delivery drone hovered over his porch. It dropped a silver crate, then vanished. No label, no logo. Just a glowing panel that blinked. Authorized access. Only. David hesitated. Max growled softly beside him. Then David touched the panel. HSSSSSHH. The crate hissed open with cold steam rising into the morning air. Inside, curled up and wrapped in a thin sheet, was a girl. No, not a normal girl. Her skin was a soft lavender color. Her hair, white like snow, glowed faintly under the sun. She was shaking, scared, and barely breathing. David took a step back. What was this? He hadn't ordered a person. He hadn't ordered a living creature. The girl opened her eyes, wide, silver, and shining like stars. She looked straight at him. Her lips trembled, and she whispered, "Please, don't return me, David's." Heart skipped. She looked like a child, no older than 12. But something in her eyes felt much older. He stepped closer, slowly, hands raised. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said gently. "Can you tell me your name?" She shook her head, tears falling down her cheek. No name, no talk. They said not to speak. David knelt beside her. Her arms had small faded marks, not wounds, but signs of past cables. Wires had been connected to her. She was no normal. Alien, she was enhanced. Max sniffed her, then licked her hand. The girl smiled a little. It was the first sign of life she had shown. David picked her up carefully. She was light, too light, like she hadn't eaten in days. He carried her inside and wrapped her in a warm blanket. She didn't resist, just kept whispering, "Please, not back in the box, please." He gave her soup. She didn't know how to hold the spoon. He taught her gently, and she copied him like a child. After eating just a few spoonfuls, she fell asleep on the couch. David looked at the crate again. He scanned the serial code. Nothing came up. No product info, no order history. It was as if she had never been listed at all. Later that night, while the girl slept, David tried to contact the company, but the ad was gone. The website didn't exist anymore. It was like it had never been there. He sat down and watched her breathe. Her chest moved up and down so softly, like she might vanish at any second. She wasn't a pet. She was someone. The next morning, when she woke up, he asked again, "What do you want to be called?" She looked confused. "Called?" "Yes," he said. "You need a name." She paused, then pointed to the sky through the window. The early morning stars still shined faintly. "Nova," she whispered. David smiled. "Nova, okay, you can. Stay here, Nova," she smiled back, unsure but hopeful. It was the first time someone had called her something kind. But as David looked out the window at the now empty sky, he couldn't shake the feeling. Someone had sent her here, and someone might come back to take her, and if they did, he knew he wouldn't let her go without a fight. David woke early. The sky outside was still a dark shade of purple. Max, his dog, lay curled near the warm fire, and the alien girl, Nova, slept under a soft blanket on the couch. Her small body hardly moved, except for the slow rise and fall of her chest. David poured himself a cup of hot synth coffee and stared at her. He still couldn't believe what had happened. He had ordered a smart pet. Instead he got her, an alien child with no past, no records, and no idea how she ended up in that crate. When Nova woke up, her silver eyes opened slowly. She looked around the room, confused but calm. David gave her a warm smile. "Morning, Nova," he said. Softly, she blinked at him, unsure. He handed her a cup of warm milk. She held it with both hands like it might disappear. "You sleep okay?" he asked. Nova nodded slowly. "No cold, no box," she whispered, almost like a question. David sat beside her. "I want to help you," he said gently, "but I need to know more about you. Where are you from? Who are you?" Nova looked down. Silent, then she shook her head. "I don't know," she said, her voice trembling. "No name, no home, only lights and voices." David frowned. "Do you remember anything? Before the crate?" She hesitated. "White room, always bright, always cold. Voices told me, 'Obey, obey, be quiet, don't speak unless spoken.'" His hands tightened into fists. Who would treat a child like that? Even an alien child? He tried another question. "What kind of things did they make you do?" Nova tilted her head. "Repeat words, repeat shapes, solve puzzles," they said. "Good pet learns fast." David's stomach turned. She wasn't just a smart companion. She was a test subject, a project, something made and trained. Not loved, not protected, just owned. He stood up and opened his old laptop. "Let's see if I can find anything about that serial number again," he mumbled. Nova walked slowly behind him, curious. As he typed, she leaned closer and said, "Why you care?" He paused, surprised. "I don't know," he replied honestly. "Maybe because you're alone. Maybe because no one else did." Nova blinked. "No one ever cared. They only wanted me to obey." David smiled, trying to keep it light. "Well, around here, you don't have to obey. You just have to eat your meals and maybe help Max fetch sticks." Nova looked at Max, who wagged his tail and licked her hand. She gave the tiniest smile, the kind that broke your heart a little, like it. Had been years since she smiled at all. The laptop screen blinked. "No matches found for product PX19. David tried again, using hidden network routes. Black market forums, old military links, still nothing. It was like the model never existed. Or someone had wiped all traces of it. "Nova," David said. Slowly, "Do you remember anything that sounded like a name? Anything they called you?" She thought hard, then shook her head. "No name, just code, PX19. That's not a name." David replied, "That's a tag." She touched her chest. "Nova sounds nice," she whispered. David nodded. "It fits you." He printed out a basic ID form and showed it to her. "This is for your records, in case anything happens." She looked at the paper with wide eyes. Her name written in bold. Nova, under species. David had written unknown, protected. Under guardian, he had signed his own name. She stared at the paper, touching it like it was a treasure. "I have a name," she said softly. "I have." Someone. David felt something in his chest tighten. He hadn't expected to care so deeply. But now that she was here, he couldn't imagine sending her away. That evening, while Nova helped him feed the chickens, a loud noise echoed through the trees. A faint humming, almost like a drone. Nova froze. Dropping the bucket, her eyes went wide with terror. "They're coming," she whispered. "They always come when it's dark." David looked toward the sky. He saw nothing, but he felt it too. Something wasn't right. Nova ran to him and clung to his side, shaking. "Don't let them take me," she pleaded. "Please, I'll be good. I won't speak. Just don't let them take me." David put a hand on her shoulder. "No one's taking you," he said firmly. "You're safe here, Nova, I promise." But even as he said the words, his mind was already racing. Who were they? How long did he have before they came? Again? He knew now. This was bigger than a wrong delivery. This was a secret someone didn't want revealed. And he had just become the only person standing between Nova and whatever nightmare she came from. The wind howled outside the farmhouse as night fell. David checked the locks twice. Maybe 3 times. He couldn't relax. Not after what Nova said. "They always come when it's dark. she had whispered. Those words stayed in his mind, playing over and over like a warning. He looked at her sleeping form on the couch, wrapped in her blanket, hugging Max the dog like he was her protector. David loaded his old plasma rifle and placed it near the door. It had been years since he used it, but muscle memory never faded. At midnight, the silence broke. A soft mechanical hum echoed in the distance. David's eyes snapped open. He grabbed the rifle and stepped outside. Cold wind stung his face, but he focused on the sound. Then he saw it, a dark shape in the sky, almost invisible against the stars. It wasn't a bird. It was a drone, silent, fast, and scanning the ground with a red beam. David ducked behind a tree and watched. The drone hovered above his barn. For a moment, then it moved closer to the house. His house. He ran back inside. "Nova, wake up," he said firmly but gently. She opened her eyes, and in one glance, she knew. "They found me," she whispered, voice shaking. "Basement," David ordered. He pulled back the rug and opened the trapdoor. It led to an old root cellar, dark, cold, and hidden. "Stay quiet, no matter what," he said, helping her down. Max followed her, pressing close like a furry shield. David closed the door and covered it with the rug again. Just as the red scanning beam hit the window, the drone hovered outside the front glass. David stood still, not blinking, not breathing. The drone clicked, then flew away, or so he thought. 2 minutes later, there was a soft thud on the roof. Then another. Footsteps. David grabbed the rifle and aimed at the ceiling. He didn't shoot. Not yet. He waited. Then the door burst open, not with force, but like it had been hacked. A tall figure stepped inside, wearing black armor with no insignia. A helmet covered its face, red light blinking from the side. The figure scanned the room slowly. David stepped forward, rifle raised. "That's far enough," he said, voice cold. The figure paused. "You have something that doesn't belong to you," it said in a metallic voice. David didn't move. "I didn't steal anything," he replied. "She came to me, scared and starving." "She is classified property," the figure said. "PX-19 is not a person. It is experimental. Merchandise." David's finger moved to the trigger. "She has a name. She has feelings. She is not a thing." The armored figure took a step forward. David fired. The plasma bolt hit the wall behind the figure as it dodged sideways. They rushed each other. David slammed the butt of his rifle into the figure's helmet. Sparks flew. The figure swung back, knocking David into a chair. They fought hard, fists, elbows, anything they could use. But David had something the figure didn't, a reason to fight. With one last move, he slammed the figure into the bookshelf. Books and tools crashed down. The figure groaned and stayed still. Its visor cracked, revealing part of a pale blue face underneath. Not fully human, not fully alien either. David dragged the body out the door and locked it from outside. He ran back to the basement, opened the trapdoor. Nova was curled up in a corner, shaking. Max growled quietly beside her. "It's okay," David said, breathing hard. "They're gone for now." Nova looked up at him, tears in her eyes. "I told you, they would come. They always come." David knelt down and held her. "You were right," he whispered. "But they didn't take you, and they never will." She clung to him like her life depended on it. Maybe it did, he felt. Her heart beat through her skin, fast and scared. Later, after she calmed down, he checked the unconscious figure again. Its comms were still active, sending out signals. David smashed the device and buried it deep in the forest. But the damage was done. More would come, back inside. Nova sat by the fire, quiet. David handed her a warm cup of tea. "I'll understand. If you want to leave," he said, "I can help you run, hide, anything." Nova shook her head. "I don't want to run forever," she said softly. "I want to be real, not a pet, not a number." David nodded. "Then we'll stop running. But to do that," he added, "we need to find out who made you and why." Nova looked into the fire. For the first time, Her eyes held something new, not fear, but anger. And maybe a little hope. David didn't sleep for the next 2 nights, not really. He stayed up monitoring the security cameras he set up around the house. Every rustle outside made his finger twitch toward the rifle. Nova stayed close to Max, barely speaking. The fear had returned to her eyes. But David had a new purpose now. He needed answers. He needed to know what PX-19 meant, who created Nova, and why someone was willing to kill to get her back. So he left Nova in the care of his trusted neighbor, Old Man Garrick, a retired medic who owed David more than one favor from the war. "She's not safe," David said. Garrick nodded. "Neither are you, son. But go do what you need to do." David traveled to the old black market town of Craven's Hollow. It was hidden underground, full of smugglers, tech dealers, and people who didn't ask questions. He wore a hood, kept his head low, and walked straight to the darkest booth in the back. "Name's Kuro," said the man behind the glass. "You don't look like someone who deals in pets." "I'm not," David replied. "I'm looking for information. PX-19 model from the Red Circuit Labs." Kuro froze. His eyes narrowed. "Where did you hear that name?" David didn't answer. He just placed a chip on the table. It held encrypted data from the drone that attacked his house. Kuro scanned it, then leaned back slowly. "You have something powerful," he said, voice low. "PX-19 was part of Project Obedience, illegal cloning, and hybrid intelligence." David stayed silent. Kuro continued. "They were trying to make the perfect living pet. Smart enough to obey any command, but not smart enough to rebel." David clenched his fists. "And they used real DNA?" Kuro nodded. "Mostly alien, some human, but they made a mistake. PX-19. She developed faster than expected. She started asking questions, started showing feelings." David's voice turned sharp. "So they locked her up, wiped her memories, and tried to sell her?" Kuro looked around and whispered, "They sold her to the wrong person, you." David stood. "I want names." Kuro hesitated. "There's a man, Dr. Vask, lead scientist on the project. Disappeared 2 years ago. After the lab was shut down. Where is he?" David asked. Kuro smiled slightly. "If I knew, I'd sell the info for a fortune. But rumor says he's hiding in the outer wastelands, near the ruins of Station X9. David left without another word. He had a direction now, a reason, a mission. When he returned home, Nova ran to him and hugged him tightly. "I thought you left me," she whispered. David knelt and looked into her glowing eyes. "I told you, I'll never leave you." He told her what he had found. She listened quietly. Her hands trembled when she heard the name Dr. Vask. "I remember the voice," she said. "He used to tell me I was broken, that I needed fixing." David looked her in the eyes. "You are not broken, Nova. You're the bravest person I've ever met." That night, Nova sat beside the fire, thinking. David watched her from the kitchen. She looked small but strong, like a flame that refused to die. "Do you want to find him?" David asked. Nova nodded slowly. "I want to know why I was made, and I want to tell him." "I am not his toy," David smiled. "Then we go together." The next morning, they packed supplies. Max barked, excited, sensing adventure, before leaving. David placed a message beacon on the porch. If anyone else came looking, they'd find nothing but a simple message. "She's not yours anymore." As they left the safety of the forest and moved into the dry, cracked lands of the wastelands, Nova held David's hand tightly. The sun beat down on them. But Nova didn't seem to care. For the first time in her life, she was walking toward the truth. Not in fear, but in strength. David looked at her as they walked, a small girl once locked in a box, now walking tall, not just someone he rescued, but someone who was becoming something more. Not a pet, not a project, but a person, a fighter, and maybe family. The wastelands were endless. Red sand stretched in every direction. The wind carried dust that stuck to their clothes and skin. David walked ahead with Max, who sniffed the air carefully. Nova followed silently. her eyes scanning the horizon. They had been walking for 2 days, sleeping in an old shuttle wreck and eating small ration bars. But Nova didn't complain. She didn't even ask when they would reach the ruins. She was focused, determined. She was no longer afraid at night. Under the stars, she sat beside the fire with David. He showed her how to read a map, how to tell direction from the stars, and how to charge the COM scanner without drawing attention. "You're learning fast," David said, smiling. Nova looked up. "I like learning. When it's my choice," he nodded. "That's what freedom means." She looked at the fire. "Will they come for me again?" David poked the fire with a stick. "They'll try, but we'll be ready." The next morning, they reached the edge of the old ruins. Rusty towers stood like skeletons in the sand. Cables hung like broken vines. This was once a research base. Now it was a graveyard. They found a hidden tunnel entrance under a collapsed platform. David used his tools to open the rusted hatch. Inside, the air was stale but breathable. They walked down into the dark, flashlight beams cutting through. The dust. Nova suddenly stopped. She touched the wall. "I've been here before," she whispered. "This was one of the places where they trained me." David looked around. The walls had faded signs. PEX program. BioWing 03. Restricted access. He took out his scanner and activated it. The signal was weak, but something flickered ahead. A room still had power. They entered the lab. Monitors blinked, broken and flickering. And in the middle was a cracked glass pod. Nova walked toward it slowly. "I remember this," she said, voice shaking. "They kept me in here between tests." David looked around and found an old access port. He plugged in his handheld and copied the remaining files. It was all there. Records, test logs, and voice memos. One voice repeated often. "This is Dr. Vask. Subject PX-19 shows signs of resistance. We will begin memory suppression tomorrow." Nova closed her eyes. "I remember that voice," she whispered. David looked at her. "If we find him, what do you want to do?" Nova opened her eyes, firm and clear. "Tell him I'm not his anymore. And make sure he can't do this to anyone else." They spent the next 2 hours scanning files and mapping a path out. David found something interesting. A transport route. A hidden shuttle path that once connected the lab to a neutral starport. "If we can reach this starport," he said, "we can leave this system, go somewhere safe." Nova looked at the map. "It's far," she said. David nodded. "Too far to walk. But we might not have to." He had a plan. Inside one of the lower hangars, there was a prototype hover truck, part machine, part alien tech. It hadn't been used in years, but it was their only chance. They found it buried under sand and broken. Crates. Nova crawled inside the engine chamber while David cleared the dust. She connected wires with quick hands. Her fingers moved like they had done it before, because they had, in another life, under someone else's control. Now she used those skills to escape, not to obey. After 2 hours, the lights blinked. The engine hummed weakly, then roared to life. Nova climbed out. Oil smudged on her cheek. David grinned. "You're a genius." She gave a small smile. "I just followed the cables." As they loaded supplies into the hover truck, David handed her a small device. It was a wristband with a red button. "If anything happens," he said, "press this. It'll send a signal to every nearby COM tower. The whole galaxy will hear your voice." Nova stared at it. "So I won't disappear again," she said. David nodded. "Never." That night, they camped one last time before starting the escape. Nova sat by the fire, thinking deeply. "David," she said, "why did you help me?" He thought for a moment. "I've seen a lot of bad things in this galaxy, but none of them made me as angry as seeing you in that crate. You didn't belong there." She looked at him quietly. "You're not like the others," David smiled. "Neither are you." Nova leaned back against Max and closed her eyes. She wasn't just planning to escape now. She was planning to live tomorrow. They would head to the starport. And for the first time, she would choose her path. Not because someone programmed her, but because she wanted to be free. **. The The hover truck sped across the wastelands. The engine groaned as it crossed broken paths and rocky dunes. David drove with one hand on the wheel, the other ready on his blaster. Nova sat beside him, focused and calm. Max rested in the back, ears alert, sensing danger in the air. They had been traveling for hours. The sky had turned orange, and a storm was brewing behind them. But it wasn't the weather that worried David. It was the silence, too quiet, too still, like something was watching. Suddenly, the scanner blinked. "Red," David cursed under his breath. "Someone's tracking us," he said. Nova turned quickly. "Can they stop us?" Before he could answer, a sharp sound cracked the air. Zzzhakk. A bolt of energy slammed into the side of the truck. The vehicle shook violently and tilted, then steadied. David tightened his grip on the controls. "Hold on!" he shouted. 3 black hoverbikes appeared behind them, each one carrying a hunter in dark armor with glowing visors. "They're here," Nova whispered. David's face hardened. "They're not taking you." One of the bikes fired again. But David swerved. The blast missed and hit the rocks. Nova reached for the emergency panel and opened the back hatch. Cold wind rushed in. Max barked wildly, ready to protect. David shouted, "We have 2 minutes until the engine gives out." Nova looked back at the hunters. She took a deep breath and climbed halfway into the hatch. "What are you doing?" David called. "Buying us time," she replied. Nova activated the rear defense module, a rusty turret with weak aim. She had one chance. She remembered how they trained her, how they forced her to hit targets. Now she used those same lessons to fight back, but this time for her own freedom. The turret locked on. She fired. The blast hit one of the bikes and sent it crashing into the dirt. 1 down, 2 to go. David shouted over the noise, "Hold on, I'm turning." He swerved sharply into a canyon pass. The hover truck slid along the edge of the cliff, rocks falling below. Nova nearly slipped, but Max bit onto her jacket and pulled her back inside. The hunters didn't stop. One flew over the cliff and dropped down in front of them. He aimed his blaster straight at the windshield. David narrowed his eyes. "Not today," he muttered. He slammed the truck forward. The impact sent the hunter flying backward. The bike exploded in the air. Nova covered her face from the heat. But the last hunter was smarter. He stayed behind, waiting for the truck to break down. David's warning light flashed. "Fuel low. Engine overheating. We're not going to make it to the port," he said grimly. Nova looked down at her wrist. She remembered the red button David gave her. "It'll call everyone," he had said. "It'll expose everything." "Do it," David told her. "We're out of time." Nova pressed the button. A soft beep echoed, and then silence. It was sent. Then the engine failed. The truck skidded and crashed into a sandbank. There was still smoke rising from the hood. The last hunter landed nearby and stepped off his bike. His weapon glowed hot in his hand. Nova tried to get up, but her leg was injured. Max growled and stood in front of her. The hunter pointed at David. "Step aside or die." David stepped forward, blaster raised. "She's not yours," he said. "She's not a thing. Not a product," the hunter laughed. "She's a failed experiment. She doesn't belong anywhere." David fired first. The hunter dodged and returned fire. The blasts lit up the canyon. David rolled and took cover behind the truck. Nova pulled herself forward, pain in her leg. She saw David breathing hard, bleeding from a burn on his shoulder. He was fighting for her, even when it hurt, even when he might die. "No," she whispered. She grabbed a broken panel and hot-wired it to overload. Then she crawled out and threw it at the hunter's feet. It exploded with a bright flash. The hunter fell back, screaming. Blinded, David didn't wait. He tackled the man and knocked the weapon from his hand. A short, brutal fight ended with David slamming the hunter's helmet into the sand. It cracked, and the man went limp. David stood, panting. Nova crawled to him and hugged him tightly. "You fought for me," she whispered. "No one ever fought for me." David held her close. "You're not alone anymore. Minutes later, a ship appeared in the sky. It was the rescue call, a neutral faction ship drawn by Nova's signal. They had proof now, files, witnesses, and Nova herself. As the ship landed, David looked at her and smiled. "You did that," he said. "You called them. You saved yourself," Nova nodded. "I just didn't want to lose you." The ship's engines hummed softly as it lifted them into the sky. Nova sat by the window, her silver eyes wide as she looked down at the wasteland. The land that once held her prison now grew smaller and smaller beneath her. Max rested his head on her lap, and David sat beside her with his arm in a sling. She held a warm drink in her hands, but her mind wasn't on the taste. It was on everything that had happened. The crate, the fear, the running, the hunters, and most of all David. The man who had changed everything. A medical officer came over to them. "You're lucky we picked up your distress signal when we did," she said. David smiled weakly. Luck had nothing to do with it. She made the call. The officer looked at Nova and gently asked, "Name?" Nova hesitated. She glanced at David, unsure. "Nova," he said for her. "Her name is Nova." The officer nodded and began filling out an official refugee record. David noticed the screen still had the field open for legal guardian. He paused, then quietly said, "You can put me down." Nova's eyes widened. You want to be my guardian?" David looked at her with a soft smile. "You're not a pet, Nova. You're not an experiment. You're someone, and someone like you deserves a family." Her hands trembled as she set the cup down. "Nobody has ever said that to me," David nodded. "Well, get used to it. You're stuck with me now." Later, the ship docked at a neutral starport orbiting a peaceful colony planet. There were no cages here, no labs, no cold rooms with blinking lights, just air, sunlight, and people who didn't stare. Nova took her first steps into a world that didn't want to use her, a world where no one called her PX-19. Here, she was Nova. They were taken to a quiet shelter where David's injuries could heal. Nova helped wrap his shoulder each morning. She sat beside him when the pain made him wince. "You don't have to take care of me," he told her one day. "But I want to," she replied. "You took care of me when I was nothing." David watched her each day as she grew stronger. She laughed more, learned faster, even helped repair the local comm systems. The technicians were amazed by her skills. One day, a reporter came to interview David. "We heard you exposed a secret lab trafficking living beings," the man said. David looked at Nova, then back at the camera. "I didn't rescue a pet," he said. "I rescued a person who deserved better than what this galaxy gave her." The footage went viral across colonies. Outrage spread. New laws were passed banning artificial pet programs across many systems. Nova watched the video silently, then looked at David. "You changed everything." David shook his head. "No, you did. You're the reason the galaxy opened its eyes." Weeks later, Nova sat on a hill near the shelter. The sky was clear, and the stars blinked gently above. David joined her and sat down beside her. "You still thinking about your past?" he asked. She nodded. "I wonder how many others like me are still out there." David looked up at the stars. "Maybe one day we'll find them, help them too." Nova smiled softly. "I want to be someone who helps," David smiled back. "You already are." They sat in silence, not because they had nothing to say, but because they finally didn't need to speak. They weren't running, hiding, or fighting. They were healing together. As they walked back to the shelter that night, Nova gently reached for his hand. David looked down at her. Surprised. "Hey," she said. "I know I call you David, but would it be okay if I sometimes call you something else?" He raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" She looked shy for a moment. "Maybe, Dad?" David stopped walking. His throat tightened. No one had called him that since before the war. He blinked, then smiled. "I'd be honored," he said. Nova smiled back. "Then let's go home, Dad." And they did. Not to a house full of silence, but to a place filled with warmth, with laughter, and with the kind of love that doesn't need programming. It's chosen, it's real, and it lasts. Not A pet, not an object, but a daughter, a family, finally.